The morning my neighbor knocked on my door changed everything. I remember it was a Tuesday, the kind of quiet Tuesday where nothing feels like it should matter, pale winter light coming through the kitchen curtains, the smell of coffee I hadn't touched yet, the low hum of the heating unit doing its best against the January cold. I was 68 years old, recently retired, and sitting at the same kitchen table where my wife Eleanor and I had eaten breakfast together for 31 years. She had been gone for 14 months. I still set 2 mugs out of habit. I had sold the house 3 weeks earlier. Not this house, the other one. The big one on Clearwater Drive, the 4-bedroom colonial Eleanor and I bought in 1987 when we still believed we'd fill every room with noise and children and chaos. We did, for a while. Then the children grew up and moved out. Eleanor got sick, and the house became something I walked through instead of lived in. After she passed, my son-in-law encouraged me to list it. The market was strong, he said. You don't need all that space, he said. It'll be good for you to let go, he said. He was right about the market, wrong about everything else. The house sold for $1.4 million. Cash offer, no contingencies, closed in 19 days. My real estate attorney called me from the title company and said, "Daniel, you just had a very good month." I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes after that call. Not crying exactly, but not crying either. 34 years of mortgage payments, of leaky gutters and refinished floors and a backyard my wife turned into something out of a garden magazine. 1.4 million. I didn't tell anyone right away. That was my first mistake, or maybe my only smart decision, I'm still not sure which. My daughter Carol called that same evening. She lives in Portland now with her husband and 2 kids, and we talk every Sunday, reliable as church. She wasn't calling about the house sale. She didn't know yet. She was calling because she'd heard from her brother that I'd seemed distant lately, and she wanted to check in. That's Carol. She still checks in. Her brother is my son. His name is Robert, and he is 51 years old, and until 4 months ago, I would have told you he was a good man having a hard time. Robert went through a divorce 7 years back. Messy, expensive, the kind that leaves scorch marks on everything nearby. He has 2 teenage kids from that marriage, pays support, rents a condo in the same suburb where he grew up, and works in commercial insurance. He calls me less than Carol does, but when he calls, the conversations last longer. We talk about football. We talk about his kids. We talk around the things that matter. His wife, his current wife. The second one is named Sandra. They married 4 years ago. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. Outdoor venue that rained on schedule. Sandra is 43, attractive in a careful way, always dressed like she's about to be photographed. She works in real estate, which is how she knew what that Clearwater Drive listing was worth before I'd even signed with an agent. I liked Sandra fine. I thought she liked me fine. I was wrong about that too. When I finally told Robert about the sale, he drove over the same day. Brought a bottle of champagne that I didn't open because I don't really drink anymore, and they knew that. He hugged me at the door, this big bear hug that he doesn't usually give, and Sandra smiled her careful smile and said, "Daniel, this is incredible. You must be so relieved." I said I was. I offered them coffee. We sat at this same kitchen table. The conversation started warm. Robert talked about how proud he was of me for making the decision, how Eleanor would have wanted me to move forward, how this was the beginning of a new chapter. Sandra nodded along and asked questions about the timeline. When would the funds clear? Where was I planning to keep the money? Had I spoken to a financial advisor yet? Good questions. Reasonable questions. The kind a caring daughter-in-law asks. Then Robert said, "Dad, I want to be honest with you about something." I told him to go ahead. He told me he was in trouble. Not small trouble, real trouble. He'd made some investments 2 years ago, leveraged more than he should have, and the losses had compounded in ways he hadn't anticipated. He owed money to people who were not patient about being owed money. The number he gave me was $240,000. I didn't say anything for a moment. He said he wasn't asking for a gift. He'd pay me back. He had a plan. He just needed a bridge, something to get him out from under this before it got worse. Sandra reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "He's been carrying this alone for over a year, Daniel. It's been so hard on him. On all of us." I looked at my son's face. He looked tired in a way that I recognized, the way Eleanor looked in the hospital during the second round of treatments, when she was still trying to seem fine for everyone else's sake. I told him I needed to think about it. He said, of course. He said he understood completely. He said, take all the time you need, Dad. They left around 8. I washed the mugs. I sat in Eleanor's chair by the window and thought about my son's face and thought about $240,000 and thought about a lot of things I can't entirely put into words. I didn't sleep well. The next morning, I went to see my financial advisor, a woman named Patricia, who has managed my accounts for 11 years and has never once told me what I wanted to hear when it wasn't true. I described the conversation without mentioning any numbers. I said my son had come to me with a financial situation and asked for help. I asked her what she thought I should do. She asked me how much. I told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Daniel, before you do anything, I want you to ask yourself one question. Not about whether you love your son. I know you do. But ask yourself, why now? The house sold 3 weeks ago. Who knew about the sale before Robert came to you? I hadn't thought about it that way. I went home and I thought about it. The answer, when I laid it out honestly, was Sandra. Sandra had known about the listing. Sandra worked in real estate. Sandra had access to the MLS, to the pending sale records, to the closing timeline. She would have known the funds were clearing. She would have known almost to the day. That didn't make Robert's debt a lie, but it changed the shape of the conversation in my mind. I called Carol that Sunday. I didn't tell her about Robert's debt. I just told her the sale had closed and asked how she was doing. She told me about her kids, about a work project that was going well, about a hiking trail she'd done with her husband that she wanted to take me on someday. I said someday. We hung up. I sat with everything for another week. Then I made a decision. I would help my son, but I wanted to understand the full picture first. Not because I didn't trust him, I told myself it wasn't that, but because Patricia's question had gotten into me and I couldn't get it back out. Why now? Who knew? I called Robert and said I was leaning toward yes, but wanted to sit down together, just the two of us, and go through the details. No Sandra, father and son. He said, of course, absolutely. Whatever you need. We made plans for the following Saturday. Lunch at my place. I'd make soup, the chicken soup Eleanor used to make, that he'd always liked. What happened the Friday before that Saturday is the part I still have trouble saying out loud. My neighbor's name is Howard. He is 72, retired postal worker, widower, and he lives directly across the street from me. Howard and I have the kind of friendship that doesn't require a lot of tending. We check on each other in bad weather, wave from driveways, occasionally walk to the corner coffee shop on weekend mornings, when neither of us has anywhere to be. He's not the kind of man who gets involved in other people's business. That Friday afternoon, Howard knocked on my front door. I opened it, and he was standing there in his heavy coat, and he had an expression on his face that I'd never seen on Howard before. Uncomfortable, like a man who knows he's about to say something he can't unsay. He said, Daniel, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not make a big thing out of me telling you, because I almost didn't. I told him to come in. He sat at the kitchen table. He didn't take his coat off. He said that the day before Thursday he had been in his front room when he noticed a car in my driveway that he recognized as Sandra's. This was around 2 in the afternoon. I had mentioned to Howard that I was having Robert over Saturday, not Friday, and he thought it was odd that someone was at my house when I wasn't home. He watched, he said he wasn't trying to spy, just noticed, and he saw Sandra let herself in through the side door. I felt something cold go through me. I have a keypad on the side door. I changed the code 3 months ago when I moved into this house. I had given the new code to exactly 2 people, Carol and Robert. Robert must have given it to Sandra. Or Sandra had asked for it. Or Sandra had watched him enter it. Howard said she was inside for about 20 minutes, then left. No boxes, no bags. He'd almost called me right then, but talked himself out of it, and then he'd spent the whole next morning talking himself back in, and here he was. I thanked him. I told him I was grateful. I told him to please not mention this to anyone. After he left, I walked through my house slowly and tried to figure out what Sandra could have wanted. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing was missing that I could see. I checked my desk. I checked the filing cabinet where I keep financial documents. Everything appeared to be in order. Then I went to the kitchen and looked at the shelf where I keep my medications. I'm 68. I take 3 prescriptions, blood pressure, cholesterol, a mild blood thinner I've been on for 2 years since a minor cardiac event. The bottles were where I'd left them. But one of them, the blood thinner, looked slightly different. The safety cap wasn't seated the same way. I always leave it, twisted slightly clockwise, until it clicks twice. It was clicked once. I know because I am obsessive about that particular bottle. My cardiologist made me obsessive about it. You don't want surprises with blood thinners, she told me when she prescribed it. I stood there in my kitchen for a very long time. Then I did 2 things. First, I called my cardiologist's after-hours line and described what I was seeing. She told me not to take anything from that bottle, to put it in a sealed bag, and to bring it in Monday. Second, I called my son and told him lunch was still on for Saturday, but I was thinking about his situation and I wanted to start fresh. Wanted to make his favorite. That meant the good coffee, the real stuff, not the decaf I usually kept out. He said that sounded great. I went to the pharmacy and bought a new bottle of my medication, sealed, clearly untouched, and started taking from that one instead. I put the old bottle in a bag in the back of my closet. Saturday came. I made the soup. I made real coffee, the kind Robert likes, in the good pot. I set 2 mugs at the table. I waited. My son arrived at noon. He came alone, like I'd asked. He looked rested, lighter somehow than he'd looked the week before, like a man who has already started counting money that hasn't been handed to him yet. He hugged me at the door. He said the soup smelled incredible. We sat down. I poured the coffee. We talked for a while about nothing, his kids, a game that had been on the night before, a memory he had of Eleanor's soup from Christmas years ago when he was small. I let him talk. I listened. I looked at my son's face and tried to find the person I raised, and couldn't quite locate him under whatever this was. I had not touched my coffee. After about 20 minutes, Robert said, "Dad, I want to talk about what we discussed. Have you had a chance to think it over?" I said I had. He said he knew it was a lot to ask. He said he wouldn't blame me if the answer was no, though his expression told a different story. He said he just needed to know where things stood so he could figure out his next move. I told him I wanted to ask him a question first. I asked him who had access to my house. Something shifted in his face. Just for a second, barely a half second, and then it was gone. Smoothed over, and he said, "What do you mean?" I said I'd noticed someone had been in my house earlier that week when I wasn't home. I asked if he'd given my door code to anyone. He said no. He said absolutely not. He looked me right in the eyes when he said it. I nodded slowly. I said okay. I believed him, I said. Then I picked up my coffee mug and held it with both hands, and I said, "Robert, I need you to look at me and tell me that you love me and that you would never let anything happen to me." He didn't hesitate. He said, "Dad, I love you. You're my father. Nothing is more important to me than you." I set the mug down. I said, "Then I need to show you something." I went to the closet, and I came back with the medication bottle in the sealed bag, and I set it on the table between us. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Robert stared at the bag. His face went through several things in quick succession: confusion, then recognition, then something that collapsed inward on itself like a building coming down. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His face said everything. I told him about Howard. I told him about what I'd found. I told him about the cardiologist's advice. I told him I'd already been in touch with my attorney. My son put his hands over his face. He stayed that way for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, smaller. He said, "I didn't know she was going to do that, Dad. I swear to God I didn't know." I told him I wanted to believe that. He said he'd told Sandra about the sale and about his plan to ask me for help. He said she'd been the one to push him, to say this was the moment, that he needed to secure this before I did something else with the money. He said he'd given her the door code because she said she wanted to drop off a gift for me while I was out, something to welcome me to the new house. He said he didn't ask questions he should have asked. I told him that not asking questions is still a choice. He nodded. He was crying by then, quietly. The way men his age cry when they're genuinely ashamed, rather than performing shame. I asked him if he wanted to know what I was going to do. He said yes. I told him I'd already given the medication bottle to the police. Not my attorney first, the police. I'd driven it to the station the night before and made a report. The detective I spoke to was thorough. She asked excellent questions. She explained what the next steps would look like. Robert's face went pale. I told him that was the part about Sandra. As for the part about him, about my son, I told him I hadn't decided yet. I told him that depended on what he did in the next 24 hours. He asked me what I needed him to do. I told him I needed him to be honest. Not with me, I'd already heard from him. I needed him to be honest with the detective who had given me her card, whose number I now slid across the table. I needed him to tell her everything he knew, everything Sandra had said, every conversation, every plan. I told him the difference between being a witness and being a co-conspirator was paper thin, and the only thing standing between him and the wrong side of that line was whether he walked into that police station voluntarily or waited to be asked. My son picked up the detective's card. He looked at it for a long time. Then he put it in his shirt pocket. He stood up from the table. He said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." I told him I knew. I told him I was sorry too. He left without touching the soup. Sandra was arrested 11 days later. The lab analysis of the medication bottle confirmed that several of my blood pressure tablets had been replaced with a different compound, something that, combined with my blood thinner, could have caused serious internal bleeding. My cardiologist used the words potentially fatal when she called me with the analysis results. She also said, "Daniel, whatever made you check that bottle, trust that instinct for the rest of your life." What made me check the bottle was Howard noticing a car in my driveway. What made Howard knock on my door instead of looking the other way was something I asked him about 2 weeks after Sandra's arrest, when we were walking to the corner coffee shop on a Saturday morning, the way we sometimes do. He thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I kept thinking about what I'd feel like if something happened to you, and I'd known something was wrong and didn't say anything. I decided I'd rather have an uncomfortable conversation." I told him that uncomfortable conversation was the reason I was standing there having coffee with him. He said, "Well, that's reason enough." Robert cooperated fully with the investigation. He did walk into the police station voluntarily the following morning with an attorney he'd called that same night. The detective told me later that his account was consistent and thorough, and that he'd provided texts and emails that were significant to the case. The district attorney charged Sandra with attempted poisoning, aggravated assault, and criminal trespass. Her attorney negotiated, but the evidence was substantial. She entered a guilty plea 6 months later and was sentenced to 7 years. Robert was not charged. He lost his marriage, his condo, and a significant part of his self-respect, and he spent the better part of a year in therapy working through things I don't have full visibility into, nor should I. He called me every week during that period, sometimes just to talk about nothing, football and weather and his kids, the way we used to. I answered every time. I did not give him the $240,000. I did give him something else. Eventually, a conversation with Patricia, my financial advisor, who sat with him and helped him restructure what he owed and map a path forward that didn't require my money, just my willingness to co-sign a refinancing arrangement that cost me nothing if he stayed on track. He has stayed on track. So far. Carol flew in from Portland when she found out. She sat in my kitchen and cried in a way that Carol almost never lets herself cry, and she said, "Dad, I can't believe you went through all of this alone." I told her I hadn't been alone. I told her about Howard, and about Patricia, and about the detective, whose name was Reyes, and who had been thorough and kind in equal measure. Carol asked me if I was angry at Robert. I told her I'd thought about that question more than any other question in the past several months. I told her I had landed somewhere more complicated than anger, something that had forgiveness in it, but also a border, a clear line, the kind of thing you can maintain with love. She nodded like she understood. I think she did. I had Howard over for dinner the following month. I made the chicken soup. He brought a bottle of sparkling cider because he knows I don't drink, and we sat at the kitchen table and ate, and talked about the neighborhood and his grandchildren, who come visit in the summers, and a documentary he'd seen about the Postal Service in the 1970s that he thought was very good. Before he left, I told him I'd set up a small fund in Eleanor's name at the local community foundation. A scholarship for kids from the area going into public service teaching, social work, postal work, that sort of thing. I told him the first contribution was in both our names, his and mine, because it felt right. Howard stood at my door for a moment and didn't say anything. Then he said, "Eleanor would have liked that." I told him I thought so too. I still set 2 mugs out in the morning sometimes. I'm working on that. I'm working on a lot of things at 68, learning which relationships to tend and which to hold at careful distance, learning that love for a child doesn't require you to be a victim of that child, learning that the neighbors who show up uncomfortable at your door are often the people who matter most. My medication bottles are all sealed. I check the caps. I don't think I'll stop checking for a very long time. And some mornings, when the light comes through the kitchen curtains a certain way, pale and quiet and particular, I sit at this table and I drink my coffee while it's still hot, and I think about Eleanor, and I think about what it means to still be here, and I think that whatever made me look at that bottle, whatever instinct or grief or stubbornness, kept me paying attention in a moment when it would have been so easy not to. I am grateful for it. I am very, very grateful for it.